Okay, I've got to start today by revising a previous analysis that I've made. I now believe that it is possible, but it is still going to be an uphill battle for Democrats to take control of the Senate in 2020. Really good post about this on our subreddit from user HomieAlex7. And Homie Alex is completely right. The reality has changed, so our analysis has to change. So if you've heard me talk about this previously, I've said that there is a very real chance of removing Donald Trump from the White House in 2020. That's the presidential election. That in the House of Representatives, where Democrats currently have control, there is a very real chance that Democrats could extend their majority above and beyond where it is now. But I said that when you look at the Senate and you look at the seats that are up for re-election in 2020, that it didn't seem plausible that Democrats could take control of the Senate. And really, we'd be looking at 2022 as the first serious opportunity where Democrats could take control of the Senate. But the good news, if you want Democrats to take control, is that there are now some specific races that have changed where it is still an uphill battle, but Democrats can take control of the Senate in 2020. So we're going to get into exactly what races these are, and we'll do the analysis. And then really after we do the case by case, the race by race analysis as it may be, it'll be important to do sort of a more overarching step back look at it, because a lot of times it's not about individual races, it's about the general way that the election will go. So quickly catching up, there are 100 seats in the Senate, 2 per state. There are 6-year terms in the Senate. Every 2 years, about a third of those 100 seats are up for election. Next November, Class 2, they have classes 1, 2, and 3, splitting the 100 seats up into 3 classes. Class 2 is up for re-election. That's 33 seats. And then in addition to those 33 seats, there are 2 special elections. One is in Arizona to fill the vacancy left by the death of Republican Senator John McCain. There's also a special election in Georgia because Senator Johnny Isakson, who's also a Republican, is resigning at the end of this year. So of the total 35 seats that are up in 2020, Republicans have 23 seats to defend, and Democrats have 12 seats to defend. Many of the Democratic seats are safe for Democrats. Massachusetts, for example. Oregon is another one. Many of the Republican seats are equally safe for Republicans, like Louisiana and Montana, for example. But the balance of power often ends up depending on a small number of races. And there is now a path that is not an outrageous one for Democrats to take the Senate. So right now, the 116th Congress, Republicans have 53 seats. Democrats have 45 plus 2 independents that tend to caucus with them. It's Bernie Sanders and I believe it's Angus King. 53 to 47, effectively, Democrats needing 4 net seats to take over control, putting them at 51 and Republicans at 49. The other scenario is that if Democrats take the White House, the vice president becomes the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, meaning Democrats could have a net gain of 3. That would make it 50-50. And then the vice president, who would presumably be a Democrat if Donald Trump is defeated, would become the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. That's another scenario. So first things first, before we look at what seats Democrats could take from Republicans, are there any current Democratic seats that could be lost or are likely to be lost to Republicans? And the answer is yes, there are. The one that comes to mind is Doug Jones in Alabama. Right now, this one is likely to be lost to a Republican. Doug Jones defeated Roy Moore, the serial accused child sex assaulter, in a special election down in Alabama at the end of 2017. If indeed Doug Jones is defeated, and he could win, but the polling doesn't look good for Doug, that would mean Democrats need to take back 5 seats in order to net a gain of 4, or 4 plus winning the White House to have the tiebreaker. So are there 4 or 5 seats that Democrats could take from Republicans? And the answer is that yes, they are, in no particular order. Colorado. Colorado is currently held by Republican Cory Gardner. We have former presidential candidate John Hickenlooper, who's running there. He's up, according to the latest poll I found, by 13 points. That's one seat that is likely to go from Republicans to Democrats. Seat number 2, this is one of the ones that's changed recently. Susan Collins, because I believe, at least partially, her loud support for Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Susan Collins in Maine could be defeated now. She is losing popularity. She's still doing well in the Senate polls, but she could lose. This is one where the ground game is what will determine what happens, but it's potentially winnable, and it's more winnable than it's been in a long time. Susan Collins has been in that seat since 1997. That's 22 years, and this is probably her most vulnerable re-election campaign yet. That would be seat number 2. Number 3, Arizona. There's that special election in Arizona for John McCain's seat. Martha McSally was appointed there. She has not won an election. Astronaut Mark Kelly is running against her. In a recent poll, Mark Kelly is +2 over Martha McSally. The prior poll had him even. It's close, but he's in it. That would be seat number 3. Number 4, now we're getting a little more speculative. Tom Tilling in North Carolina. Tillis. This is definitely one that is a bit more of a stretch. The polling still has Tillis ahead by about 3, but he's not super popular. And North Carolina is a place where we have seen Republicans move away from approving of the job that Trump is doing more than in many other places, which means that it could be winnable in North Carolina. That's 4 seats. And then number 5 is Iowa. Absolute total lunatic Republican Joni Ernst is still polling +2 or 3 in Iowa. Her popularity is down significantly. She's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and it is also potentially winnable. So those are the 5. Homie Alex7 on our subreddit also points out there are some longer shots. Like if you look at Georgia, where the Republican is only +5, you could look at Texas. John Cornyn is not super popular. I've said, what if Beto O'Rourke were to abandon the race for the presidential nomination because he has no chance and get down to Texas? Could he defeat John Cornyn? So those are a little more speculative, but this is potentially winnable in 2020. Now, to be thorough, there's one other Democratic seat that is not super safe, and that's Jeanne Shaheen in New Hampshire. The polling is very close. We've got to work on that one as well. We have to hope that the incumbent Democrat will ultimately pull away. So these races require work. And the important thing now, if we want to do a more macro analysis, this is looking at it race by race. The reality is that the general pro or anti-Trump sentiment, pro or anti-Republican sentiment is likely to have a more general effect. So it's not, if Texas ends up being in play, it's probable that North Carolina is winnable and Iowa is winnable, et cetera. If Trump's popularity goes back up, if Republican attitudes towards Republican incumbents resurge, then it's likely a lot of these will not go our way. But still, if you want to get involved in an individual race, all you can do is work that race. And if you live in any of these states, even if you don't, and you can still phone bank, this one's going to require work. But 2020, the Senate is winnable.